Jonas Gahr Støre is Norway's Minister of Foreign Affairs. He has been one of the most passionate advocates for increased focus on developments in the High North. Minister, the level of knowledge about what's happening in the Arctic and the High North is changing all the time. Does that make it very difficult to formulate policy?
No, I think to the contrary. When knowledge increases, I think the ability to formulate policy goes up. Of course, there is a degree of complexity, because as knowledge increases, you see the complex nature of challenges and opportunities in the North, ranging from climate change to sailing routes, energy exploration, legal issues. But I think in general, for all policy making, we should welcome increased level in knowledge. Conferences such as these is bringing the collective body of knowledge up, and we have perspectives from military and civilian sides. So this is all to be welcomed, and we see it in important policy formulations in Russia, European Union, Norway, of course, we've been on this for quite some years, in the US, with Arctic strategies. And I think all of that is high time, and it's happening now, and that's generally to be welcomed.
There is a rapid pace of change in many areas here in the region, such as physical with the ice caps melting, economic with the changing price of oil, and ecological with changing migratory habits of fish. Are you confident that we're able to keep up with that rapid pace of change?
That is a big question. I think, generally, if you add sailing routes, resources, people, and resource scarcity generally, you have combinations for conflict. But you also have ingredients for progress. So I think the big challenge for us is to preserve what is now the status of the High North, namely low tension. To keep the tension low, because all of the things you would like to achieve, and that goes the same for Norway and Russia and the US and Canada and others, is that we have a sphere of cooperation which is productive, non-confrontational, and I think we have the body of international law, the Convention of the Law of the Sea, rights and obligation of coastal states, as a foundation for dealing also with differences. So I think what we need to get out of this is a major focus on dealing with differences in a non-confrontational way. And that may succeed, and I think we all stand to lose if it doesn't.
It's been mentioned here today that there can be healthy competition and unhealthy competition. What do we do to ensure that the competition remains healthy?
Well, I think as for all when there's quest for progress from states, and companies, private sector, you need rules and regulations. And I think what we've seen in the international economy recently, if you let that loose and let that slip, you're in for something which is quite dramatic. So I think it should be a priority for governments to have as a point of departure the Convention on the Law of the Sea, which gives us a lot of guidelines for how to deal with differences, how to deal with rules and regulation formulation. And then we have to move to those bodies that do adopt sea lanes, do adopt search and rescue procedures, do adopt management procedures for fish in international waters, and so on. And that we are doing that ahead of time and not, chasing developments. So I think, for politicians, for governments, we do have the tools. We do have the opportunities, and it's really now about building collective momentum for action and for seizing those opportunities.
Do you feel that the High North is a global issue?
Good point. I mean, the Arctic Council has the Arctic coastal states, plus Finland, Sweden and Iceland. The issues at stake, however, in the Arctic are global, as you said. That's the fascinating part of it. Here in Nato we talk about indivisibility of security. That is largely a geographical notion, that we are all linked in the same security pot together. But I think we are now seeing indivisibility of security also from a thematic perspective. Global warming is all about, interdependence, no matter where you are on the globe. So what we need to do, I think, is to identify those bodies where the appropriate rules are adopted, where there's policy formulation, decision shaping, decision making. And they vary. We have to accept there is not one global body for Arctic issues where we all come together and adopt the rules. We have to go to the IMO to do a lot of the transport things, for example, or the UN bodies. The Arctic Council, however, I think is a very important council for those most affected states to agree on these procedures. And then we have to take the concrete work onto those bodies. The fact that the European Union is now adopting its Arctic strategy is good and positive, because large part of what the EU is deciding has relevance for the Arctic. Same goes with US, Canada, Russia, of course.
Is there a danger that some of the problems may purely be about misperception of the issues in the High North, in that 4 of the Arctic countries are NATO allies and the other one is Russia?
Well, I think there's image and reality at the same time. What I try to stress in my interventions is that, we had the old Cold War thinking, where part of the Arctic was really center of the conflict's eye, where the East met West, at our border with Russia, basically. What we have to do now is to acknowledge that we live in different times, where most of these risks we have to manage are not owned by one state alone, not owned by the military alone. They are civil, military, pluri-state challenges. And from a Norwegian perspective, Russia is part of the solution to most of them rather than part of the problem. At the same time, have no illusion. We are neighbors to Russia with a large military capability, with increased military activity in the region, for all the more reason why we need NATO. But I think, we have to go through that mental map transformation and acknowledge that there are really new times in this region. And we have to do that, I think, in expanding cooperative procedures with Russia. That's why Norway has been very skeptical to the idea that when we have a difference with Russia, we kind of punish by limiting dialogue and contact. The NATO-Russia Council is a resource for managing differences and where we have common positions, and we only hurt ourselves if we close down on those channels. So this is a challenge for us, and indeed it's a challenge for Russia. We have to welcome and expect that Russia also behaves as a constructive modern partner. The Arctic is really about testing, and I think the seminar, there was one expression here that it is testing our ability to apply modern policies, which are tailored to today's challenges.
How would you qualify the level of cooperation with Russia?
From a Norwegian perspective, we have had correct bilateral relations with Russia always. Norway has been in peace with Russia for 1,000 years. We should not forget. Different neighbors of Russia in NATO have very different stories of that relationship. And I have to bring to the table in NATO my experience, my country's experience, which is one experience of peace. We went through very difficult years during the Cold War, but at the same time we managed correctly neighborhood relations. We manage the fish in the Barents Sea together, the cod, which we own kind of 50-50, with quotas and resource management. And today we manage a border. In 1990 there were 3,000 people crossing that border. Last year there were 105,000. So there's integration going on, and I think an important contribution of Norway to NATO's relations with Russia is to bring that experience to the table. Then, we need to see more channels between NATO, the EU, the West, and with Russia. So I think that that is the way we should pursue integration, but not integration without mutual expectation of behavior and emphasis on policies. And I think we've come far, but there's still a lot more we can do. Norway initiated in 1993 the Barents Sea Cooperation, which has the Barents Sea states together, cooperating as governments, but also with the local communities of our northernmost part of our